谷川岳飛びます。よっしゃ。ちょっとうろしましたけど、谷川崎です。 2時半までいね。 残念でした。ラジオの音声でよかった。トレーニングです。11時40分。 まだ当分だ。ラクダのコルフ。
And his sincere belief that science and physics and particle physics can help reveal the deepest secrets of our universe. So without further ado, let me introduce Dr. Christopher Quigg. Thank you. Sir.
Thank you for coming tonight. It's a great pleasure to be with this audience. You know, all of us think of ourselves as explorers, and explorers need support, of course, financial support, but even more important, being able to come home from our voyages and share our discoveries with people. And we've had the pleasure over many years of doing that with this audience in the Fermilab community. So I thank you for being part of that. It makes our work. So, 50 years ago, this 6,800 site on which we find 6,800 acre site on which we find ourselves looked like this. There were the 400 residents of the planned community of Weston on the east side of the laboratory. Many farm families who had settled here and tilled the soil, the Illinois soil, for many years. And it's very different now. In the space of a few short years, it became an international destination for physicists, welcoming scientists from all over the world and producing results that are valued by people all over the world. It's also named, as you've just heard, for Enrico Fermi, the Italian-American physicist, who was revered by all of us. He died in 1954, so he never got to see Fermilab, nor did we benefit directly from his input. But he was someone that we call the last universal physicist. He was a master of both theoretical physics and experimental physics. And this is something, he knew all the subjects of physics and was able to communicate and teach them. So he's been one of my personal heroes, and it is wonderful for me, and I think for my colleagues, to be at a laboratory that bears his name. founders of our laboratory, Bob Wilson and others, wanted this to be a quintessentially American laboratory, but open to the world at large. And one of their first acts was to honor the legacy of what had been here before. So you see on the east side of the laboratory in sock circle, a number of the original farmhouses. Several of them are gathered together here in the building that we call Aspen East, which has served as a dormitory for many years. The little houses in the village of Weston have been used as dormitories or residences for visiting scientists, originally for labs and office space in the early days. And the roads in the east side of the laboratory in the Fermilab village have been named for some of the Native American tribes who were inhabitants of this area even before the Europeans came. Our founders made no little plans. This is an early scheme in which you see the village on the right, the big ring there, which is nearly 4 miles around, 2 pi kilometers around, was the sketch of the accelerator. And over time, this plan has evolved and been put into shape. And this is the conception of the laboratory now. You see that it bears the same outlines as the original, but with a number of very important additions that point to our present and our future. Now, Fermilab was founded at a time when the national instinct to get together and to do complicated, difficult, expensive things for the common good was much in evidence. So that was good. It was also a time of social upheaval. It was a time in which the nation was coming to terms with its legacy of segregation in the past. And the funding of the laboratory was threatened by the fact that the state of Illinois and the surrounding communities had not yet adopted open housing legislation. Our founders, Bob Wilson and Ned Goldwasser, his deputy, both by that exigency but also by personal conviction, wrote this statement of human rights for Fermilab. It says in part, it will be the policy of the National Accelerator Laboratory to seek the achievement of its scientific goals within a framework of equal opportunity, employment opportunity, and of a deep dedication to the fundamental tenets of human rights and dignity. And then skipping over here, in any conflict between technical expediency and human rights, we shall stand firmly on the side of human rights. So that's been a beacon to us for all of this time. They didn't just talk or write. They also put their ideas into action. And one of the first actions was to find a group of young men in Chicago who had demonstrated a technical aptitude to bring them to the laboratory and begin training them to be technicians, eventually engineers, and so on. Part of their training took place at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory in Tennessee. And here they are on the tarmac, I guess it must be at Midway Airport, about to board their flight to Oak Ridge for the beginning of their training. Many of these people have been with us for decades, and all of them are among the billers of the laboratory. Wilson was a man who was born in a place that he called Frontier, Wyoming. No one knows whether it actually exists or not. And he wanted, again, this to be an American laboratory, so he imported 5 bison, to which the state of Illinois added a few other very early on. And as often happens when you try to do something interesting and good, it has unintended consequences. So the urban or maybe suburban legend grew up that the buffalo were actually here as canaries in a mine. There was no internet in those days, but had there been an internet, you would have read there that they're very sensitive to radiation, and when they detect radiation, their hair falls out. If you come back in the late spring, when they're shedding their winter coats, you'll find that all of their hair falls out. So don't be frightened by that, and come and enjoy our buffalo. So here was the groundbreaking for the main ring, our 2 pi kilometer around ring. You see everybody was there. Everybody's wearing hard hats except the boss. Everybody has a big clunky shovel instead of the boss. The boss has a gold-plated or maybe brass-plated shovel. If you'd like afterwards to come up and take a selfie with Wilson's shovel, Please feel free, but don't harm anybody around you. And my chief operating officer will be happy if you wear a hard hat while doing that. So there it was. That was the beginning. I came here as a visitor. I was a fresh PhD, and I came here for a week in the spring of 1971, and I remembered two things. One is that there was a lot of mud, and the second was that it seemed like a very exciting place. So now we look at the chain of accelerators. The first big piece of the accelerator was a reincarnation of one of the earliest accelerators. It's called a Cockcroft-Walton machine. This was the machine in England that was actually first used to artificially disintegrate the nucleus, and it still, until recently, served as the first stage of the accelerator at Fermilab. It's a very efficient way of getting up to a few tens of thousands of volts. Next comes the linear accelerator. There it is. He's actually cleaning, not sleeping. It's called a linear accelerator because it's in a straight line. That's the second stage of the acceleration. Then comes the booster accelerator, which is just behind us out back, which takes the protons up to about 8 billion electron volts. Here's some components of that being installed. You see lots of people doing lots of hard work in those days, and you saw some mud. Here's the main ring tunnel being finished. Again, lots of mud. This was done by cutting the ground away, so digging the ground away, installing a concrete flooring, and then using hoops to cover it, and then covering that back up. And here's what the main ring looks inside. The reason for this plastic is that like many Wilson constructions, the roof leaked, and so the magnets, which have plenty of problems